Hey YouTube, Poopslag here, and this is TurboFat, an open source puzzle game I'm making in Godot. The source code's linked below if you want to check out how it all works. And this month I was fleshing out the puzzles, adding a few new mechanics and stuff, including one that I think is pretty hilarious, and hopefully you'll like it too. But along the way I also had a few small improvements that I've been putting off that I finally got to, so hope you'll stick around and see what I did. So TurboFat's introducing all these new pentomino pieces, and I'm having to come up with rules for how they rotate, which is fine, but I wanted to give you some insight into how the U piece, for example, what the iterations it's been through. The first iteration, it was spawning whole side down and then rotating around that hole, which sort of made sense because it was like, oh, you can rotate it left and right, and it sort of stays in the center three columns. I liked it that way. But it was sort of too stiff, and you couldn't do these cool spin moves as other pieces could. So I tried tweaking that and having it rotate just like a J and L piece, where it'd still rotate whole side down, but then flip around the stick in the middle. And that was fine, but it violated this sort of innate finesse rule that all other pieces have, where if you rotate them right, they almost always go to the right. Well, they always go to the right. If you rotate them left, they always go to the left. And now the U piece was breaking that. It was going the opposite direction. So the newest iteration that I have now is it is spawning flat side down now, and everything else is the same, and it feels okay. The only thing is it'll catch you off guard if you're playing fast and you're just expecting these pieces to fit together. The T and U piece now do not fit together. You have to rotate them 180 degrees to make them fit. So it's driving me a little bit crazy, but it is what it is. It seems like the lesser of the three evils. Let me know when you're playing if you have other ideas for how these things can rotate. I'm sort of just winging it. So Godot 3.5 introduced scene tree tweens, where before, if you wanted to say turn a node slowly invisible or something, you would have an object called a tween node in your tree. You would launch that node and then, maybe reuse that node if you ever wanted to make something else invisible. But in Godot 3.5, you would just instead say, I want to make this object invisible, so create a tween for me and then just throw it away when you're done. And it's very useful. Except Godot didn't like the whole throwing it away when it was done thing, so instead it just kept it around forever, which meant if you ran a game for longer than 5 or 10 minutes, it would just eventually crash. So this is a pretty bad bug, so I ended up not using that feature yet, but I'm looking forward to when it's closed in Godot 3, and then I'll come back and try using it. So I used to split up the creatures in my game into primary and secondary folders. Primary for the guys who would never show up as a random customer because they had like plot importance, and secondary for just all the normal guys. But I didn't like that because it was a little bit too rigid. So now it's split up into story and non-story folders, and both of those can have a customer if flag set. So I can have like a central story character who then later is like, oh, now that I know who you are, I'll show up as a customer only at your restaurant. I also added this little button to the release toolkit where it'll just check those folders and make sure they're accurate. So if I accidentally have a guy in the non-story folder, but he is in a few cutscenes, it'll tell me like, hey, you need to move that guy into the right place. So I added a bunch of cute new tools and toys to help me make cooler levels, one of which is the ability to insert lines anywhere in the playfield instead of just at the bottom. So for example, I have this level called Shelf, where a bunch of pieces start on like a shelf halfway up the level, and if you clear lines at the bottom, they stay up here. The shelf does not drop, but if you clear lines above the shelf, then things drop onto the shelf. And that's just done by inserting a blank line cleverly at a certain point in the level. So that was easy. I also added things that can like trigger after you clear X lines, things that can trigger when you make snack or cake boxes, and you can have multiple timers running. And those just let me create a bunch of creative new levels that I'll get to in a minute. So I think the coolest thing I did this month is these little moles. They show up on the playfield and they dig for a few seconds. And if you leave them alone, then they'll dig up a little treat for you, either a star or a seed, which is worth a few points if you catch it with your piece. They're the first of 4 categories. I wanted to have like little puzzle surprises that show up during the puzzles, and I wanted to have like little animals that'll show up and help you out, little like evil guys who show up and do something bastardly. And then I wanted to have like vegetables and fruits that'll show up and sort of get in your way and be obnoxious. And somehow, I don't know how this will quite work, but like the opposite, some sort of like sugary food that'll show up. And maybe it's already there. Maybe it's just the food you collect. But I wanted to have, the opposite, some sort of food that shows up and helps you out in some way. So someone has argued that like the moles are kind of anti-thematic because you got like your food, and you got your vegetables that you're cooking with and stuff, and then like rodents running around. That doesn't really make a lot of sense. But they're so cute, So I think this time, theme can take a hike. They're too cute to throw away. All right, so these moles are like really versatile. You can do a lot with them as far as saying they should only appear on the surface or underground. They appear like 10 at once. When the player drops like 10 pieces, maybe they'll appear every 2 seconds and stuff like that. So you can do whatever you want with them. The first thing I did with them, I made this level above and below where the bottom 3 rows are reserved for the moles. That's the only places where they'll appear, but it doesn't get covered in. It's sort of like that shelf level. So You can stack a bunch of boxes over here, and then once the moles dig up a bunch of stuff for you, go down and collect that, and then you go back to stacking and then wait for the moles to show up again. It's kind of fun. Next level, Surprise Guests, is where just like every 10 seconds, it seems like a normal level, and then just out of nowhere, like 10 moles show up and they just start digging crap up for you. And as long as you manage not to squish them and to play where they aren't, you get a huge reward for it. So you're sort of rewarded for being more dynamic and playing around them. And then the third type of level that I made is this is one where the snack boxes and cake boxes on the level are actually empty. You don't get any reward for clearing those. They're just 0 points. But every time you make one, a whole bunch of moles show up. And if you make a big cake box, then like tons of moles. So the tricky part, though, is now you get a bigger reward, but again, only if you don't squish the moles. You have to sort of play around where they are. So I found myself fixing the sound effects bug that I fixed in every game engine I've ever worked in, which is basically if you have, say, like a mole digging up something, you'll hear a sound that's normal. If you have 10 moles digging up something, you don't hear 10 sounds. You hear the same sound 10 times as loud, and it sounds stupid. So the fix is I have this generic sound effects player where you can say, why don't you play this sound? And it'll check. It'll say, when was that sound last played? And if it was played too recently, then I'm not going to play it. Otherwise, I'll go ahead and store that I'm playing the sound now, and then I'll say it's okay to play. And then the next guy who goes to play it will see that, oh, wait, that was just played like 15 milliseconds ago. I don't need to play that sound. This is super generic, so anybody can reuse this node. And it's such a common problem that if you have solved this problem in a better way, please tell me, because I will just use your fix. I have no need to make my own crap for this. So I also decided last week I'm going to be setting aside 1 day a week for Frog Finder development. This is a game jam game I made about a year ago. It's a little puzzle game. It looks like it's oriented towards kids, but honestly, given how difficult the puzzles get, I don't think most kids would have the patience for it. But I have some ideas for fleshing it out. So I'm going to be just putting like 1 day a week towards it just to make sure the project stays moving forward, and it eventually gets finished. So that's where we're at after September. We added these moles to the puzzles and a bunch of other new cute little puzzle features, so we should be able to add some cooler new stuff later. Next month I do want to add a couple more levels. I did want to add some vegetables, like maybe some like carrot rockets, which get in your way and the exhaust is everywhere and you're like, get out of the way, you. I think that could be fun. And yeah, just a bunch more levels for level 2, and then also streamlining the first 5 minutes of gameplay and like the menus and having it all sort of like stitched together nicely. I mean, like the scene transitions and stuff, I think it's like 90% there, but I just have a few more ideas for that. But in the meantime, if you want to try out the game, it is still free on itch.io and GitHub. You can just play it in your browser, download it if you're like on Windows. It even supports Android, mobile stuff. And if you want to talk to the community, give me back some feedback, or just see what everybody else is doing with TurboFat, you can join the Discord. It's there as well. Anyways, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next month. Take it easy.